Prosciutto!
Everybody. Well, first of all, thank you everyone for being here. It's very nice to be in this place. I would like to start with thanking to the amazing sponsors that produced the pieces for the show. The guys that provided the alcohol, which is always good, and also the vinyl that's at the front desk. My name is Alex Trochut, and this stuff is for sale. It's a good price, and it can get signed. We can dedicate it to anybody you like. And well, as I was saying, my name is Alex. I'm a type lover, and I work in different fields, but I'm not really like a calligrapher. I'm not a typographer, and I'm not a letterer in the most common or academic way. So for me, it's a pleasure to be here and an honor to be talking to this audience in this place. A little bit of context about let's talk about typography. So let's put things a little bit in place, and so I can put myself in the map. Typography always works in two levels. There's the semantic and the visual, the content and the form. Something that we read versus something that we see. And of course, as designers, everybody works on the visual side, on the form. There's many ways of working on typography in different priorities. Text typography is basically focusing on creating a system, creating something that is readable and that can be used in a universal context. On the other hand, we have expressive typography, which is something that works in a very specific context and can be more customized. In a way, its goal is about visualizing its message in a way that can strengthen with a visual side, something that is more seductive, something that is more about style. And definitely I feel more into this side of design. But then there's also like the most academic and classic and traditional way of working with expressive typography, where we would find works that are based basically on centuries of rules and tradition and ways of writing letters in styles, and there's an objectivity to this. There's a lot of knowledge based on what's good and what's bad, and there's a lot of rationality attached to it. And then there's also the other side, which will be more like experimental, freestyle, illustrative authorship. I'm going to mention some of the masters that in a way shaped my way of working. I'm going to start from Rick Griffin from the 60s, working for all the movement in San Francisco for psychedelia. Also in the 90s, we could find James Phillips, where you would say this is an illustration, it's not really letters, but here you could read his name. So it says Jim Phillips on the veins over there. Also the work from M. Paris is such an amazing mix of fashion and art combined together to create also amazing letters. And what I like about all these people is like how intuitive is the process and how personal it gets. Also the work of non-format, huge references for me in the last decade. And finally, Sackmeister and Walsh, where they also let intuition lead their works, and also making like almost a sculptorical art with typography. All of these people kind of like are looking forward to create something new, something that hasn't been done before, and is working with the image, looking forward to create an atmosphere, something that comes from your inner soul. And I really like this quote from Carl Jung, where he says that the creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity. The creative mind plays with the objects it loves. And this is kind of like where I would like my work to be, in this area, this kind of playground that you can build with yourself, create your own rules to just like dive into this surprising wall of images and things that are interesting and seductive. In other words, I'm going to quote now to the master Bruce, and I would think this is a good way to put it. Don't think, feel it. And of course, there's always a battle between two forces, and in creativity, there's always the rational and the emotional. and there's something specific, certain, truthful, classic, but always it gets connected with what you have inside. What is this other part that you have written in your own way, and that's really personal and it's very subjective. So I'm really looking forward to work on this side and potentiate all these things, because in a way, when you're working with that kind of inner force comes out and creates something like this, you know, like something powerful. But let's go back to Rationality for a while and explain things a little bit further. I don't know if you've seen the documentary by Kiwi Ferguson, Everything is a Remix. He lays down creativity in a very systematic way, and I think it's a good way to understand how things work. Basically, nothing comes from inside us. Everything, he says, comes from outside, and everyone remixes it in a different way. So the way that we select things kind of make and shape our results. But we need to go find our toys outside, but we play inside with them. So basically there's like 3 steps to it. He says like the copy is just like a repetition, but maybe will be the first step when you're trying to imitate something. That's what it's going to start you and get you moving. Transformation is when you just like take a little alteration from one single reference, but then when the real deal is when you start combining things. When you take from more than one source and you create something new and different out of this. And talking about copies and stuff like that, this other book, it's been such an inspiration. It really speaks to the idea that copy is part of the process. Like everybody does it, everybody has done it since we were babies. We hear sounds, we imitate them, that's how we got here. And copy is something very healthy. And there is something that we need to put a difference between good and bad copy. But it's part of like, our identity is not something that it's closed and attached to anything in particular. We sometimes put ourselves in boxes. So this book is kind of encouraging everybody to look outside and kind of like see each other as an evolving, continuous process of learning. And if you took one copy, one good copy, I would like to mention this one, for example, by Marcel Duchamp. Milton Glaser referencing Marcel Duchamp. And this was something I struck from one of his talks. And you could totally see the reference from this portrait that he did for Bob Dylan, coming from this self-portrait by Marcel Duchamp. But you see how the steps were coming to a different place, and how things are like connected in a very obvious way. And this is a little bit what I try to do with letters. I pick up things from one place that doesn't belong necessarily to typography, and I put them in typography. I call them like letter translations or remixes. For example, taking stuff from illustration. The work of Charles Barnes is something I'm obsessed with, and I wanted to work with these kind of lines that he has in the hair, and then apply it to the lettering over there. Or stuff that comes from the back of your head, from memory, from childhood, like the Garbage Pail Kids, and how that applies to this graphic over here. This is a tribute to Liechtenstein, and I was working with the sounds and the strokes, so creating something that combines these 2 things into one image that reference him. Also extracting things from photography. Here, photography to illustration. And sometimes this doesn't even need to be a reference or something in particular. It can be like a flavor or like a sexy piece of meat, like this jamon, you know, and how letters will look like if they were kind of made out of this cold cut. This was also an extrapolation from the qualities of the shoe that Nike was presenting, which was a shoe that was very light and very strong, and it was based on the technology that the breeches with wires have, and that was applied to letters. So letters, what I think is fantastic is that they allow you to create something in a very abstract way, and they don't belong to nature, so it is something completely human. We create them and we deform them as we want, and it's a subject in human history that is in constant evolution. If you pick up something from a moment and a place in time, it has a translation in letters. And this is always like evolving and changing. So the doors are pretty open. And I like the room when there are like many possibilities attached to it. And speaking about references of things and feelings, I would like to mention as a reference the work of my grandfather. I think his work is definitely a good piece of content that I would like to share and explain the best I can, because I think it's if you don't know it, it's very interesting what he did. He was born in the 20s, and he grew up in a printer environment in Barcelona. This was when he was 10 years old, and these were kind of like the stuff that you can see in that time, where there was a big influence from Bauhaus coming to Spain, and everything was, of course, it was lead type at that letterpress at that time, and you could buy modular pieces, geometric shapes that you could use as letters and also as illustrations. To say it in a way, like for example, these are parts of a triangle and a rectangle, but there's a connection between both things, the shape and the letters. So it was like a little puzzle, like a Lego. And designers at that time thought about letters and illustration in the same way, because there were so many limitations on the techniques. And that created aesthetic. And this is something that I totally thought about, because limitations in the end have a very amazing consequences in terms of the ideas that come out of it. So right now that we have so much freedom, it's good that you put yourself into your own limitations, because that is going to lead you to interesting results. If you have complete freedom, sometimes that's overwhelming and you kind of feel paralyzed with so many options. But anyways, this was on the 30s, so he was like 10 years old. And by the time that the civil war in Spain exploded, he just didn't take the gun, he just drew letters. And I think that was great, because what he did was basically analyzing this idea of like, okay, let's take a letter C and let's start to dissect all this letter into different parts. So we're gonna have here one bone, another bone, third bone. So you have like a structure of 3 parts coming together. He was modulating and geometrizing this in different proportions, and also combining this geometry with more calligraphic stuff. So this was a kind of like a leap out of the Bauhaus thinking of like rigidity and like going back to basics. This was a bit more, they call it the Latin flavor of the Spanish typography. He created a massive modular system, 250 pieces. All these pieces were connected as a puzzle or a Lego, and it's probably the most complex system ever made. But you just buy one type, and with this type you can create so many things. The type was called Super Tipo Veloz, and this type allowed you to work with pieces and combine them in so many different ways in terms of typography or illustration. This is some example of how this was made in illustration. Another illustration example. And the possibilities were endless, because this was released on the 42, and towards the 60s, where like the offset was completely present, there were many possibilities that were taken by the Supergrowth. Supergrowth was only present in Spain, and kind of like faded away in history because of the change of technology, of course. But there's like many good things that I can see that there are good content to apply in everyday design. So for example, he looked at letters, this example here, the same way as he looked at the illustration up there. And these are the modular pieces that he used for the whole flyer. So what I really enjoy is like the connection that there is between the shapes of the hair of the girl and the same widths, the same contrast that you find in the letter. So that creates a very nice harmony between both parts. This is probably something that I totally picked up from his work that I really enjoy. In 2005, I was lucky enough to be working with a teacher of mine, Andreu Valius, that was working on this idea of like digitalizing all the work of my grandfather. And we created a website that is called Supergrowth.net. And if you guys are looking forward to know more about his work, in this website you can also play with the modular system and have fun with it. So I also, on my own, I did some modular pieces, and I start combining them and having fun with it. But you know, my modular systems are like 7 pieces compared to like that massive amount that we saw before. But it was a good way to work a lot with geometry and see connections with letters. When you are typing something, it's way different when you use typography as just like a tool to put a big amount of text. When you're working with modular typography and you can be more expressive, that kind of allows you to have more room for experimentation. And I also was adding like some layers to this and creating like some compositions. So I also was very interested at the time by lettering, and this was a project that came from this magazine, the Tabs, and basically this was the blank cover that I had to design. At that time, this was 2008, and I was really into doing something like this, kind of like a lettering script based on brush scripts and like script lettering that could be something related to the US, kind of old school. And I didn't have teachers that know these techniques, and I don't think I knew any book that know how to do this. So I was just, you know, like trying to do my thing, but there was a lot of mistakes involved in this process. So you could tell here, like for example, normally the thick stroke goes thick when it goes down and thin when it goes up, and it's completely opposite. So there's like a lot of things that you could tell, like, wow, this guy doesn't know what he's doing, but he's doing it anyway. And this is also another handicap that I find. I was just working with a computer almost, so I working with a mouse, and these were kind of the results. And to be honest, when I was at this point in the process, I felt like this. This was script lettering. It was definitely, there were so many options, you know, here. So many things to do. But no, completely the other way. Oh well. So here I was, and what I thought, wait a minute, what I know is a little bit the work of my grandfather. Let's try to make this kind of a modular thing. So let's work in geometry. And what I did was rationalizing all this thing into circles and put them in a grid where everything is arranged in these kind of angles. So after doing this, the composition turned out like this, and I was relieved, to be honest. And when I look back, I'm kind of thankful for not having a teacher that told me the right way, because then I kind of like discovered something myself, and I felt like, okay, I learned something, and it's less conventional maybe, but you know, on the other hand, I looked at this and I was feeling, I felt like this, you know, like I had something to do, and I just didn't do it. And I could get away with it, but in the back of my head I knew, like, dude, you're not doing your job right. So I'm very thankful that when I came here to New York, I could meet Tony Dispigna, who is a living legend that worked 20 years with Herb Luvalin doing Spencerian lettering. And also I've been taking the workshops that Ken Barber is doing at the Cooper Type, and that's been like an amazing experience for me, because that totally revealed what is all the mystery behind letters. and I learned how to do, you know, the thick stroke and the thin stroke, going in the right direction and all that. And that's been like a very good experience to me to get deep into that. This is a project that came for like 1 year ago, and this was the record cover for Wiz Khalifa. And basically, it had to be a lettering about saying his name, so it had to be some sort of portrait. So when I saw the picture, I thought like, wow, this is definitely gonna be about tattoos, for sure. So I'm gonna try to work on some kind of lettering based on this style. And these were like my first sketches. At that time, it was when I met Tony Despina, and I was like kind of working on this idea of like lettering. This was not tattoo anymore. They want something like kind of more stylish and fashion. And at this point, I was stuck because I didn't know what to do. Things were like really messy, all this area over here. And I asked Tony, like, hey, could you give me a hand with this? And he very kindly put like a scan, and he said a bunch of good, intelligent things, like for example, never cross too thick strokes, like, and always keep the same weight, separate ornaments and letters, so don't try to put them in the same level, and of course get rid of all this shit because it's not working. So in the end, I got to this result, and although it's not really like a conventional way, I didn't take the Ken Barber workshop yet, so you can tell that there are some things there, but I was pretty happy with it. These were all my sketches. I put a lot of time on it, but this was the final cover, you know. So going back to my element, I'm more like a guy that like to work with puzzles and drift in them. I love not having a preconceived idea on something and start from scratch. And many times that's the brief. Like you get a text like this, 50 things we love, and basically the brief says like do something cool with it. It's gonna be an image with letters, so it's gonna be like something that you could enjoy looking but also read. So when I start with something like this, sometimes I pick up like a big icon, like if it's a number, trying to make a hierarchy, and pick up something that is more relevant than the others. Because it was the 50 things that we love, I thought like let's make a heart. And then from here, add the other text, smaller. And little by little, like things start to define itself. And this is when I'm saying like that I like more this emotional part of design, where you kind of like let go and look for some sort of abstraction and relaxation on working on the image. Till finally kind of a face came out of there, and this was the final result with it. This is another project, kind of the same thing. This is the text. Had to be a t-shirt for Patagonia, for getting some awareness about the environment. And this is a little bit the sequence of all the steps I went through. So at the very beginning, I was, of course, working with the word and trying to look for some landscape, something that talks about the green space, trying to find like, okay, it's gonna be a tree, or like, had like definitely no idea like how to pull this off. And little by little, like, you start trying things, I guess, till you make a lot of mistakes. That's definitely what it's about, not giving up on something, because you always can find an easy solution, but there's always something unexpected that I think it's waiting to happen. And this was at this point where, okay, what about the hand that is like showing victory? If you vote for the environment is going to be happy about it. And this was a little bit the process, but at this point, it was too much organic, so it felt like it was lacking structure. And this is something that when you work with type, you kind of want the image to look attractive at the beginning, and then you want to read it. But when you read it, you want to see the letters, that they are nice. So this is when I think it needs to happen some sort of a structure behind. So this is when I went here and I put some real proportion of letters. There's always like kind of like a skeleton behind any type illustration that kind of gives a good base, a good foundation for what you're doing. If you're putting, Ken Barber says, if you put a lot of syrup to a shit, it's going to be a shit anyway. So finally to this result over here. This is another example. In this case, the 20 logos of all time. This was for creative review, and they had kind of like a voting process for which was the best logo of all time, and it was this by Franco Grignani, the Woolmark logo, and this was the blank cover, and I had to write the 20 logos of all time based on that image. So the first thing also, like, make some hierarchy, not try to put all letters at the same level. So let's make a number 20 kind of big, and but this was very flat. The Woolmark logo, it's nice because it has like sort of a calligraphic feel to it. They say that it was made with a fork in a restaurant, and it was placing the fork on a napkin and doing 3 strokes. And if we look at the logo, you could tell this was true because it's kind of like following the same angle, and it's keeping it there. It's like 3 different strokes in different angles. So it has a calligraphic thing to it, and I thought about using a calligraphic stroke, so it does this extrusion to it. And then I thought, why not make a 4 square calligraphic stroke, so you get like this kind of shape. Then with these lines, once you have them, you can remove them, and you have a front view, or you can have a back view. So that allows you to give some sort of dimension to this piece. Then the number 20 was made in this composition, and then placing these blending lines that allow you to have these lines. And this was the final image. After this project, like many times I feel like you have, if you're lucky with some projects, you have some experiences that if they're good enough for you, you can always like go back to them, and there's still like a big source of ideas to pull out. So from this is April 2011, and after this project, many others came out of like the same technique, working with lines and kind of like following the same rules, but allowing you to express in different ways. And this about ribbons. Ribbons has been something also that I've been working a lot with. In the beginning, I worked with a lot with the computer, so everything is kind of like with the same angle. And in this one, it's never crossing one to the other, so it's kind of like an unreadable image. But it kind of creates this mess. And what happens with this one is like never crosses. This one, it does cross, so it has like more like a behavior of a brush script, always using the same angle. But then I feel like a real ribbon will not follow the rules of a nib. So this has one angle here, another here. So this kind of creates more like a realistic look to it. And when I was working with these ribbons, these are some examples that I was working with ribbons, but the first time I was working with ribbons was breaking up a BH tape and just using this thing as reference to see how things bended. Then after that, tracing it, and this was a proposal for the Rolling Stone record, Rolled Gold, and kind of liked the energy of this because this was like very messy, and but in the end, the client went for this one, and it was more similar to the other one. But then I kind of like developed a technique after working a while with ribbons based on how to do this in the computer. So basically what I do many times is pick up a stroke, a base that I like, skeleton, duplicate it, and then start like crossing the blend lines in a way that create this effect. I like that this has an angle, this has another angle. And normally what I do is I work with, if you have an ellipsis or like a curve, there's always one that is more narrow, and the other one is wider. So always trying to create this thing so it creates more movement to the shape. And then always like rationalizing, so putting the same weight in every part, so things get like consistently the same amount of color. Then when I work with shadows, many times I apply this kind of effects to give more dimension to it. If you notice, this is freehand, it's not Illustrator. Yeah. Thank you. With this kind of technique, working with a computer, there are like many options that can pull out from the same technique, so allow you to have a lot of control, and this is how I feel like the computer kind of allows you to have many possibilities. But in a way, like, getting out of the computer is being very necessary lately, because computer give you like this, like a lot of control of things, but the possibilities kind of like getting this tunnel vision, and analog tools make beautiful unexpected accidents. So that is pretty much what I was looking forward to work on this Adobe project, where got an email from my girlfriend saying like, have you checked this new material called NeverWet? And basically this material, it's a hydrophobic spray that you can put to anything, and basically will make any liquid slide off, like mercury. This was the project was about making a reinterpretation or remix of the Adobe logo, and this was the first test. So this shape over here, it's the Adobe logo, and the spray, it's been placed everywhere, but in here. So the liquid behaves like kind of like this mass that stays there. This is another example. And it's amazing because it creates this invisible barrier, and the liquid gets, kind of all in here. So after doing this first test, I was experimenting a lot with different materials. Chris, I'm glad you were in the studio at this time. Probably you will get pissed. So many things happening in the backyard. I remember when I was working with cement, I dropped my phone and it fell into the cement, and I wanted to take a picture of that. I tried with different liquids, paint, alcohol, oil, dye. In the end, alcohol didn't work very well. There were these were liquid water drops, and this is alcohol. So kind of like it has a different consistency and like slides down of the material. Also, all the pieces were created in rounds in the end, because the kind of expansion of the liquid when it's in a circular space, it's way more controlled. If it's a triangle, kind of like the edges go rounded. So if you make it circular, it's way easier. And also, as you can see, all these shapes are kind of distorted. So that's why we could tilt the camera in a way that you could show the height of the liquid. What happened here, we were working with Plexi, and we were working with Luca Darola as a photographer in the shoot. It was fun working with him, and what happened here was everything was getting very condensed, so we had to use glass, a rigid surface. So what we achieved with this, it was very flat, and we put some blue dye into the composition. The results were very cool because you have something kind of controlled, digitally controlled, but then you have the physics. And that was a very fun playground to play with lights and control so many kind of lifetime rendering. It looked almost like digital. And this was the final result. And that's pretty much it. I think I wanted to cover some of different projects and explain to you what are the things that I like. And thank you very much. I'm working with these guys, with Adobe. They're presenting a video of one of their most famous programs. It's turning 25. Ooh. So I'm working on that, and that's fun. I'm also working on some personal projects that I'm trying to buy myself time to invest on that, and trying to create something that it's not related to content that comes from the client. I'm trying to generate my own ideas and visualize them, and that's becoming like a little nightmare for me because it's kind of complicated to dive into that, but I'm having a lot of fun too. So yeah, working on that. This was kind of like more like an experiment, and the sake of it wasn't really functionality, which has never been my thing anyway. But this was more like a networking sort of thing, social media, and creating, you know, like artists working with the Adobe logo in an artistic way, but not really generating use content. Yeah. Yeah, I worked 2 years in Basava. They were, I could say, like kind of like my fathers in terms of profession. They allowed me to have a lot of responsibility there and express myself, and I learned a lot. And I'm really happy I was there 2 years. I'm excited about, for example, learning 3D desperately. Like it's something that I feel like already the education that I got is completely not updated, and the designers nowadays are like learning a lot about stuff that technically it's very important nowadays, like 3D, and also in terms of lettering. I think the formation it's changed a lot. It wasn't something so much in use before, and the demand created like necessity, and right now it's very well covered. I think like the formation for that is great, and I would also like to experiment more with materials and get my work to a more physical support, and probably create something that it's less industrialized in terms of like that you could create more unique pieces, originals and stuff like that. But it's a process because my tools are always digital, so this is where I get like my final good results. And to do this step to something that is more manual, there's always a lack of perfection in many things. But yeah, that's what I'm aiming for. Sometimes it happens that you get like a good brief that kind of like gets you out of your head, and it's great because then you can discover something that you hadn't done before because you have a good art director that is putting your head in front of something. And other times you feel like I have something that I want to express and I need to find my own time to do it. But normally I don't have a system. I think it goes more for like how you see the opportunity in things, like finding your own time to work on that. Okay. Step by step, I try to avoid like working a lot and presenting something like ta-da, because it's never working. Like you need to go little by little with them, of course, and share the process. And but yeah, I gotta say, I didn't say like most of the stuff I show here is not really commercial. Some of it's more experimental, and I thought this was more like the stuff that was maybe more interesting for a talk about typography. But yeah, when it comes to a more functional work and like more for a campaign, something like that, you work with a lot of like guidance with an art director, and it's back and forth with them collaboratively.